thank you very much for being here. Very much appreciate you taking the time, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. The conversation that we're going to have is one that I would like to kick off with you, Frank, and to learn more about the problem that you were actually inspired to solve, if there was a problem or an opportunity that you were inspired to pursue. So what brought you here? I mean, not literally brought you here today, but what was the spark and the idea that kicked off Revel?
Yeah. Does it make sense to just go through the first couple of slides, or?
Welcome to. Please do.
Let's do that, because I think the answer to that will be weaved into a couple of these slides.
Fantastic.
As part of the introduction, they mentioned shared electric mopeds. That's exactly right. I've been on the Revel journey with my team for 7 years now. And this company did start with shared electric mopeds. So think of a Vespa, tops out at 30 miles an hour, you don't need a motorcycle license for. Long story short, we started that business with 60 electric mopeds in Bushwick, Williamsburg, Brooklyn as a small pilot. I raised $1 million from 57 different investors to make that happen. A lot of $2,000 and $5,000 checks here and there. Scaled that business through 2020 to 6,000 mopeds across the country, 6 markets: San Francisco, Oakland, DC, Miami, Austin, New York. That was kind of the first phase of Revel. While we were scaling that business, we realized one thing, realized meaning my co-founder and myself. If you actually want to make a dent on EV adoption, if you actually want to make a difference in electric mobility in urban areas, you have to kind of come to terms with what the US is. Cities here in the US, this is a 4-wheeled car culture. That's what we are. And my co-founder and I realized if we want to go after a bigger market, we really want to make a difference here, we have to think about the 4-wheeled sector. So our journey in the last 7 years started with mopeds. We then sort of brought that business to a completion by the end of 2023. And in 2021, we started what we are today, which is this integrated model around all electric rideshare. So think Uber and Lyft. We compete directly against those guys with a dense, reliable, fast charging network here in New York City. So we came to the realization we have to solve this chicken or egg problem back in 2019, 2020. And that chicken or egg problem is, in a city like New York, there's absolutely no EV charging infrastructure to speak of. So why the hell would anybody have an EV? And it's really hard to make money in an expensive city like San Francisco or New York or Washington, DC on charging if there's not a lot of EVs out there using your charging stations. You just built a bunch of infrastructure that's not being used that much and you're losing money. So you have this chicken or egg problem, a two-sided marketplace, what comes first? So we realized the way we solve this is we bring supply and demand at the same time. And that's where we started by the summer of 2021. We launched the largest fast charging station in North America, right here in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, 25 fast chargers. And we paired that with 50 EVs and an all-electric rideshare pilot. So really doing everything. Running the fleet, charging the fleet, hiring the drivers, building out the technology, owning the consumer platform, and obviously the charging infrastructure. So here we are a couple years later, and about to enter 2025. We have the 5 of the 6 largest fast charging stations in New York City. We have another 200 stalls coming next year, so super exciting. And we went from 50 cars to now over 500 here in New York. So we're really starting to scale the business. So I'll just pause there, just give everybody kind of like where we started, where we are today, why we did what we did.
Could I ask you to back up a bit?
Yeah, sure.
So can you perhaps dive into a little bit of sort of how you go from you're in Europe, you're seeing Vespas, to this? And what was the first question that you were asking yourself? Yeah. And what was the process that you undertook? Because it sounds so neat, the way that you explain it and present it in that way. But what did you have to learn? What were your knowledge gaps? How did you then fill them? Or did you partner with other people? What was the discovery process for you? And even thinking that from seeing the mopeds and thinking about transportation here, that you could kick off the company that you now helm?
Yeah, absolutely. So the light bulb moment was on vacation in Buenos Aires, December 2017. It's the summer down there, Southern Hemisphere, and that is just a Vespa town, moped town. That's how people get around. It reminded me a bit of Brooklyn, just in terms of like the vibe. And I'm like, why are we driving around in SUVs? We need to bring mopeds to New York. So something just went off in my head on that trip. So I came back to New York January 2018, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And what do you do when you can't stop thinking about something? You start Googling things. And you just start Googling and you start reading and you start researching and you realize, oh, there's shared electric moped systems and services starting to launch in Europe, and one launched in San Francisco recently. And why can't I do this if they can do that? So also a place of being naive as well. I think if I knew how hard the last 7 years would have been, I probably would have just gotten a job somewhere else. But that's where it started.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you secure the resources? Did you go off and buy a bunch of Vespas and a Sprinter van and start driving around the city? Did you have, what did you have at your disposal beyond the great idea?
Yeah, so just very like step by step. First, I thought about who would I want to build this business with? So that's my co-founder, Paul Suey, who leads our charging business today, has been with me all 7 years. I would not be here without him, just the support. Anyone thinking about starting anything, get a co-founder. It's invaluable. So he was the first person I thought of. I had worked with him for 2 years straight at my old job. We worked together really well. So I just thought, okay, we started off as colleagues and became really good friends. That's a great way to do it. Don't do friends pretending you'll be colleagues. Like, do the other way around. Because you know you work well together. So he was thinking about a PhD program at Carnegie Mellon. I convinced him, do not do that. Let's go start this thing. So from there, we ended up just, I mean, I remember being at my old job and like basically kind of farming it in, being as an average employee as possible. So like by 2 p.m., him and I would just go into a conference room and just start whiteboarding everything that we're doing and how would we do this and how would we get the software and what will we white label and have we talked to manufacturers yet and what's US certified to be imported in, like all of these questions. You start with nothing, you just have to like tackle them all. And we're whiteboarding things. I remember our boss walks in at like 7 p.m. and he's like, what the hell are you guys doing? You know, there's like pictures of mopeds on the wall. So obviously we told him at that point that we're about to leave in a month and start this thing. And he ended up investing some money. But yeah, it just starts with like brainstorming, understanding, having questions, and just tackling problem one after another. By April, we quit our jobs. We started to raise money. Started with him and I putting $40,000 each into an account. That's what we figured we can each afford on our own and not take a salary for 6 months. So that's what we did. We did $40K each. And then my sister put in $10,000. A kid I went to college with, who's now a lawyer, he put in $10,000, and you just start going. And then you get introduced to people within certain networks. And believe me, I come from like a blue-collar background on Staten Island. I did not have these networks, but you just figure it out somehow. I tapped a lot of the people I went to college with, just anywhere I could. I took checks as small as like $1,500. So then you raise money, and we ended up launching in July 2018.
What were you raising money for then? What was your vision? And I asked this in the spirit of what was it you wanted to achieve with the mopeds versus what you're doing now? Was this ever a glint in your eye in 2018? And was it intentional, or was it one of those where you sort of see opportunities, you see the next mountain you want to climb as a result of you climbing the first?
Yeah, when we first started, we said, okay, we want to start with 200 mopeds. We just thought that would be a critical mass. Okay, that was unrealistic. It was too expensive. We're not doing that. We ended up around 60. And we just thought, we just need to prove we can do this, that we can work with the government to get Department of Transportation on board to not shut us down, that we can literally just run a 60-something moped operation. We can integrate the tech into the moped to turn it on and off and understand where they are. Just prove that we can do it. And then our vision was, okay, that'll lead to more money to then go bigger and prove what's called like product market fit, which is like people really like this now, which we ended up doing around 2019 when we went to 1,000 mopeds. We took our first like institutional money at the fall of 2018. I could talk about that and how difficult it was and some of the things that I would suggest if you're looking for VC money. Because again, I did not have a background in that whatsoever. So yeah, we were just trying to prove that we can do this. And then the next step after that, 2019, was like, we can scale this and people really like it and it makes money. So that was kind of the two-stage function.
Could you talk about the light bulb moment when you were scaling to this? Could you sort of back into where you saw the charging stations, how you were able to develop the partnerships? First partner being your co-founder.
Yeah.
What was the next partnership, and how did you advance those? Did one door open another, or did you find things being slammed shut, so you had to create different opportunities?
Yeah, a couple of things happened. As we were scaling the moped business, the biggest barrier to launching in DC or San Francisco or Miami was not getting the city permit. That was kind of our secret sauce, honestly. We were pretty good at that. It wasn't hiring, it wasn't tech. It was, can I find one warehouse with a megawatt connection to the grid that can charge 300 moped batteries at once? And the answer was always no, it does not exist. Okay. So that just got me thinking about like, holy crap, they're talking about this EV transition in cities and every truck and bus and moped's gonna be electric. And I can't find one place in the city, no matter what I pay, that has enough juice coming into that building to charge moped batteries. So it started us thinking about like, what is the problem here around EV infrastructure and cities and how this is actually going to happen? And then parallel to that, frankly, we launched a whole bunch of markets outside the US, outside of New York, and none of them worked. None of them made money. So I just raised a bunch of money to bring the business out of New York into all these markets, and now I was just losing a bunch of money. That was tough. And I realized, okay, we're gonna need to pivot this damn thing, and what are we gonna pivot towards? Let's go after the much bigger market, which is the four-wheel sector. So that was kind of the realization. Sometimes that happens, you know. New York worked really well, and we raised money to bring it to 5 other markets, and none of them worked. And that's a really shitty feeling. But we worked through it, and here we are as a very different company than we were 4 years ago.
People talk, especially in business and with entrepreneurs, a lot about failure. How important was failure to you? And your failures, have you been able to achieve more as a result of them than you would have had they not? Would you just be managing or driving around your mopeds now had those other businesses not failed, or you actually haven't been able to charge them?
Every now and then, my co-founder and I will have a beer just catching up on everything that's going on in the business, and then we'll start talking about, remember this, and remember that, and remember that. I would say literally just in the first year, there were probably 10 different gating moments where the whole thing almost died. That's just the first year. Obviously, the amount of gating moments starts to decrease after the first year, but there's still gating moments every single year of like, this thing might die. This just happened, this is existential. And that's startups. So you have to weave around it, you gotta figure out a path around it. I'll give you one example. When we first launched mopeds, there was a fire in the port that our mopeds are being shipped out of, like a massive one, like some massive fire. Our mopeds were part of that fire. And our manufacturer started to tell us, we can't get you more mopeds till the winter. So we were like, shit, let's just close up shop, let's go home. We missed this, I don't have money, we put our money into this, I gotta go get a salary, I got rent to pay. And then we convinced them to put us to the front of the line and redo our mopeds first, and we got them by July. But if we didn't convince them and we did not win that sort of argument or that conversation, the whole thing would have died. And that was just one example, right? So you're gonna get smacked in the face a lot, like you are.
What was the first partnership with the city that you embarked upon, and what did you learn from that?
So, oh man, I could talk about all different aspects of the business. I could talk about rideshare when we launched this and the political challenges that we faced because they weren't regulatory, they were political. So the old de Blasio administration, we ran into just some headwinds there on the political side that were like outside of our control and almost killed the company, even though we checked every box legally and regulatory speaking. To mopeds where we realized, okay, this is a state licensed vehicle. The moped gets a license plate from the state. So it's actually not city regulated. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs would have seen that and said, oh, that means you can just do whatever you want. Absolutely not. Because city officials will do what city officials do if you don't communicate and let them know and make sure you're a partner at the table and you're doing the right thing. So I think my education here at SEPA and my understanding about government and how things actually work, I think other entrepreneurs would have just went full steam ahead and done whatever they wanted and moved things and break things and fast and all that. No, we sat down with the DOT before a moped ever touched the streets. We sat down with NYPD before a moped ever touched the streets. We sat down with the city council members of the districts we were in and sat across from the table and made sure they understood who we were and what we're doing. That's why we didn't get shut down, right? So that's just a learning too, right? Just because maybe there's a legal designation for you that fits, do the legwork, do the communication, make sure people know who you are, or else you will get shut down. Yeah.
What else should we know about this? Because I'm conscious of the fact that I would like to find out from our other panelists today what his inspiration was. Anything that you want to share before we go to Voltpost? Anything else that we should know about the beginning of Revel before we talk about Voltpost?
I've been talking a lot about struggles and headwinds. It's a lot of fun. It's awesome. So if you're thinking about entrepreneurship, don't get scared by this conversation. It's also not for everybody. People think they want to be an entrepreneur, they want to start their own company. You have to be able to deal with the stress and deal with the headwinds and see, and almost laugh about it. Like, I don't know how to describe it. So it's not for everybody, but if it is for you, don't be scared, go do it. It's awesome. But it's not for everybody. So just like, make sure you know who you are.
Thank you, Frank. We'll come back. This is just barely the introduction, but Jeff, I very much want to make sure that we have time and an opportunity to learn about your journey and what was your inspiration was incredibly personal and feels incredibly urgent with regards to your inspiration for Voltpost. Would you mind sharing with us how you got the idea and why?
Sure. So for me, I mean, it all started with having my son, and ultimately in 2019, when people started taking the streets with the climate strikes and ultimately standing up, recognizing we have such a limited window to turn things around, I kind of woke up. I was working in more traditional technology, leading new product development at Samsung, and started to really not ask what do I want to do next, but why. And that led me in that moment to kind of have a turning point in my career of wanting to make the great climate pivot and recognize that there were a lot of people who are working in traditional industries, technology, finance, otherwise, who are having a lot of skills that could be transferable to the decarbonization effort, that frankly, there were not clear, and there's still not always clear entry points to build that bridge. And so for me, that led me to apply somewhat impulsively to a Columbia Master's Program for Sustainability Management. At some point get in and turn to my wife and say, should I actually do this? And potentially the worst thing that could happen is I work at another big tech company if I just go get a master's here. And then the pandemic took hold and ultimately took the leap, and in the midst of the pandemic ended up really looking at a half a dozen business cases. It wasn't about Voltpost per se, it was about decarbonization. And it was really looking across sectors, energy, transportation, buildings, and really just starting to think through what the problem areas are, what the pain points are across all of these things in the decarbonization effort that was needed. And frankly, the same thing that I would do at Samsung by developing the business cases and putting together short decks that kind of begin to express a vision of what the future could be or what a product could be. Did that for about 6 to 8 different concepts, and then started to just have conversations as I would with people that I trusted in my network. And then ultimately, Voltpost just came out of being one of those ideas in a pile that people gravitated toward. Sometimes you pick a company and sometimes it picks you. You have to do both, actually, because you have to step up to the challenge of the impossible nature that it is to build a company. But in the end of the day, it was really always about decarbonization and having that center of gravity, recognizing that for the next generation, as we have such a limited window, when my son was ultimately my age now, I wanted to be able to look in his eyes and say that I did everything I could to prevent, frankly, the climate disaster that's in front of us. So with that turning point, it led me not only to Voltpost, but really just a commitment for the rest of my career to making sure that we win the race to net zero.
Could you talk to us a little bit? One of the things, I shouldn't say one of the things, but the thing that we're noodling and constantly looking at every week in the practicum is the research process, and that there is fundamentally and always an integrity to the research process, but that research can be conducted in a variety of different arenas and for a variety of different purposes. Could you talk about your discovery process, and if decarbonization was your goal and the light bulb that went off, what was your process for looking for where you wanted to find the opportunity that would speak to you? And then my next question is, what then was the process that you had to, the research process that you needed to go through to discover Voltpost?
Yeah, so if you start with the problem rather than the solution, but you recognize there's a pretty templated framework of the problem, solution, market opportunity, what is the key features of the platform or the product that you're trying to bring to the world, and then packaging that together and figuring out the competitive advantage, and like that's your 6-page deck of starting an idea. And with Voltpost, it was really more about looking at, okay, if about 1/3 of emissions are coming from transportation, and rightfully living in a city like New York, and ultimately I never had a car, but then in the midst of the pandemic decided that okay, I can't take my kid on the subway to a doctor's appointment, maybe I should get a car. Okay, if I'm gonna get a car, it's gonna be an EV. If I'm gonna get an EV, where am I gonna charge it? Okay, well maybe I'll figure it out because I'm sustainably driven and have this technology background. And then ultimately, when you experience those pain points yourself of parking on the streets of Brooklyn and recognize that there's absolutely nobody who's going to take this leap in an intelligent way if you don't have convenient and affordable charging, that just became a very clear personal pain point, which then expressed to what are the signals of what is needed in that transition. And certainly you need a charging ecosystem, the fast charging that Frank and company are going after, and it's a huge opportunity. And then this whole level 2 public integrated charging concept. And really like the retrofit lamppost solution came through just understanding how to kind of identify the signals and the noise in the research. So if you don't jump to like the what, but you really look at that problem area and you start to decipher what are the macro problem, and then what is like the bottom-up pain points, like the data points that you can pull to, and then start to craft that story with the numbers in a way that you're able to start to build the sandbox around like what actually is a potential solution to that end. And then you have a lot of assumptions going into that, and research takes a lot of forms. And I always use the example of you start with like a brick of marble and you're gonna chisel away and eventually like make a horse or whatever the heck you're gonna carve there, right? And it takes a lot of time, and it's not like you're going at it one angle. You truly do have to constantly come in really close and chip away at the details, and then come far back and come at it from different angles, and take time away from that brick ultimately to find like exactly what you're trying to build, because we're all human, and in the end of the day, we don't have the answers. We have assumptions, we have hypothesis of how to like enter into these conversations, but then as you begin to do customer discovery, i.e. talk to people who may have expertise in the area that you're trying to build a business or write a research paper or pursue whatever it is that you may be trying to build, you're able to start to decipher certain both qual and quantitative data points that begin to sharpen that story and sharpen the way you think about what it is you think about you're doing. And then ultimately, it eventually gets you to a point and really the first test is not like, will people invest dollars? It's, are people willing to invest time and their social currency, their network? And so that, I truly believe in the 6 degrees of separation thing, and like the same way, Frank, you're saying like, you don't know the VC who runs $1 billion fund when you start an idea. You don't know the commissioner of the DOT or who you think you need to know to attack that problem area. But if you do have an idea that travels, by the end of that 20 to 30 minute conversation, that person, as an ask, if you find an introduction to the person that they know, to that one VC, to that one public policy maker, to whomever it may be, that like within 3 or 4 conversations, you're typically talking to somebody who could actually move the needle forward for your business or for your research. But if you don't have it refined and developed to a point that you're able to answer those questions yourself in a way that it can be actualized, then that requires more research. It requires more storytelling and refinement, right? But eventually you get to the point where you have a thing that travels, this concept, even if it's just in a deck or just a conversation, that it gets taken into other conversations, not because you brought it there, but because the power of the idea should be expressed and could extend value into the world. And really, so like when you talk about vision, mission, purpose, values, all these tenets of like what it is to start a company, it really, in a way, creates a framework. Not that you have to have it all figured out at once, but as you start like recognizing, okay, that's the chiseled piece, that detail's great, because it's working with people, it's expressing value, it's carrying itself into another conversation. It's not like one light bulb moment, it's an iterative and additive process to the point that now you have this thing where all these people are expressing their sense of self and purpose toward building value around that. It's hard to explain.
So Frank had mentioned he started out with the mopeds and now has the super fast chargers and the fleets. Was your initial idea for every lamppost to become a charging station? Decarbonization being primary, working for an opportunity, looking for an opportunity within that. Are there slides you would like to show for Voltpost?
Sure. I mean, we can if people want to see what it is. Yeah. I don't know how to
we'll see.
switch it, but we'll see what happens. I mean, so really it started with the mission, right? To decarbonize mobility by democratizing charging access and recognizing, if this does work, oh yeah, it did, that there's 1 to 2% of cars on road that are electric, about 10% of new car sales, that we're not going to get to the 2035 100% that have been set as state mandates in New York, California, and all the other numbers and targets that are set, right? Like, just not going to get there without convenient and affordable access. The image on the left in Brooklyn was obviously not ideal, things I walked across in starting this company, and we're like, okay, well, there needs to be something. And speed of charging is one thing, but like as I was going on these charging missions, literally to paid parking lots on the edges of town or into New Jersey in order to charge a vehicle to park back on the street, you recognize that there's actually a power source right in front of you. And when you think about like any new technology as it goes from like early adopters into the mainstream, whether it be hardware, software, or otherwise, like you kind of have this innovation curve that everybody speaks to. But like where we are in the renewable energy transition is very much in the early adopters into mainstream right now of that curve. And what I mean by that is it's a certain customer segment that's actually like paying attention to this. It's a certain set of expectations that come around that. And ultimately, now that we're growing into the mainstream, there is a dynamic that is shifting in the tolerance to innovation versus expectation. And so with what we ended up building really came out of a research paper that I wrote in the Sustainability Management graduate program, which only was written based off of seeing those signals. Like the way you describe Googling, it's like, well, you see that in London, they actually did a lamppost charging pilot with a company called Innovators. There was signals. We started this beginning of 2021 after finishing this research paper at the end of 2020. And the paper really was just like looking at, when you look back in history, like it becomes obvious. And there's certain aspects of looking at the grid or building the Brooklyn Bridge or any critical infrastructure of the last few hundred years, right? Like that somebody had to say, I'm going to build the subway. I'm going to make this thing that goes under the ground and it's going to take you faster from point A to point B. What do you think? And people are like, sounds completely insane, but like somebody's got to do that. And like you might be the person, right? And it's the same ambition and insanity, frankly, of trying to pursue something that truly changes the built environment, leaves a fingerprint of value in systemic change. And so with Voltpost, I mean, we're retrofitting street lights into EV chargers. That vision has not changed, but it has been additive. And so we take a lot of learnings from working with utilities, having utilities investors, working with the public and private sector, but effectively design this thing that can live on top of existing infrastructure with no construction or trenching, be installed in about an hour at a fraction of the cost without taking new curb space. And thinking about this not just as the retrofit was the first unlock, but then the second being the modularity and the platform-based approach. And what I mean by that is when you think about a encasing of the hardware on the existing infrastructure, the modularity enables us to maximize the uptime, lower the operating maintenance costs by actually having effectively Lego bricks that can mount and be plugged in without massive training. And so that then opens up the opportunity to not just have a charger, but charging being the entry point because of the signals, the why now. So like when starting any company, if you're going to go down this, and I'm jumping around a bit, but like it starts with like what is the problem you're trying to solve? Why you? Why this? And why now? And you have to be able to articulate very closely. In the end of the day, early investors, and we same way through our Columbia network and just angels and people who are close to you end up writing small checks, founders writing small checks to just get the business into a bank account and get going and get off the ground as an actual business. But it is, people talk about rolling closes, like for the first round, like it is an additive process until you think you're raising a few hundred thousand, then a few hundred thousand becomes 500,000, becomes a million, becomes a 1.3, and then you call it an oversubscribed pre-seed round, right? But like you didn't start raising that 1.3, you started with people describe friends and family, but you start with the people who believe in what you believe and see the vision of what can be created.
I could hug you for everything you both just said right now. But so for my fellow travelers, our students in the practicum, every week we're talking about presentation and the questions that you need to ask and the story behind it. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Why? I'd love to jump into some of the questions, both that have been submitted by our students and colleagues, and some that come to mind. Both of you have mentioned signal and noise. Is there any guidance, any advice that you would give that help you to intuit, no, that's noise. I need to block that out. You're both talking about, and I said this to Frank earlier, I don't feel like disruption is the right word, but I don't have a better one right now for the work that you're doing and the spaces that you're doing it. But how do you know that you've got the signal if you're looking for creating something that didn't exist before?
I mean, it starts with whether it be market or policy tipping points. And that can be before Biden being elected, having as part of the policy dimension that there was going to be this thing that ultimately became the IRA. And having that foundationally being like, wow, there's going to be a lot of money potentially if this person wins the election that's going to go into clean energy in a way that has not gone historically, right? So that's like a thing that you can point at and say, well, why now? Why not like 2 or 3 years ago? Well, because there's a lot of money on the public side that's going to be dumped into this. To what end? Who knows, right? That's like one example. Another is like you look at year-over-year market growth in a sector. So if you see that there's like a huge uptick in solar and the price of solar coming down exponentially, then that creates like another interesting data point to say, you're kind of basically just looking for these contrasting data points to say, oh, that's interesting. Like, what does that mean but it's not one data point. It's like pulling together a story of data points. Then you could be like, if I put together this puzzle of A, B, C, and D, then that might mean that this thing should exist.
Frank, what are your thoughts on signal, noise?
I think Jeff made a good point about policy. So something for our business in the last 12 months has been, so when we went into this integrated model, high-level strategy was the tailwind we're going to have at our backs is the electrification of rideshare in cities. That's probably the one thing we got right. And it is happening. It's happening in real time right now. How we build the business and day-to-day and duck and dive and we're going to change this, that's just called building a company. And getting from A to B is that, right? That's just the way it is. But the fact that the B is exactly what we said and it's happening, it's awesome. So in the last year, both the state of California and New York City have mandated all rideshare, meaning Uber, Lyft, companies like Revel, have to be 100% electric. Why is that meaningful? In a city like New York, there's over 100,000 Uber, Lyft vehicles that do 40 to 60,000 miles a year. So that being electric by 2030 is literally like electrifying over 1 million personal EVs. Because these are also the drivers that they don't have a garage or driveway to charge at the end of the day. They need a public fast charging network. So the entire state of California and New York City, this is happening. We're seeing the impact on our business in the last 12 months in terms of our charging rates and the amount of throughput that we're having. So it's awesome. I would say the other piece in terms of noise or signal, or maybe another way to answer the question is your business starting to make money?
That's a good signal.
Right? That's a good signal. Now's the time to put more money into this, more capital into this. And our charging network in New York is now making money. That was not the case 12 months ago. We were losing money. Every month that happened, I would just lose money. Right? So that's a huge signal. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it answers the question.
Okay.
It absolutely does. And next question, in both of your cases, you had your idea. There were partnerships that you needed. How did you mentioned before that you got a co-founder, and that helped you to be able to advance the idea. But in terms of the engineering, the finance, the legal, and the policy, landscapes that you needed to navigate. How did you fill the gaps in your own knowledge? Was it a case of building relationships, or did you need to hire additional services? Did you need to retain an attorney? How did you fill your own knowledge gaps, whether it be engineering, policy, finance?
I guess I could start. I mean, you have to get people to believe what you believe, starting with that point, and that starts with a co-founder or co-founders. I've had two, one a technical co-founder that I worked with for half a decade at Samsung. You're an award-winning industrial designer, 50 patents to his name. I have 5, okay, fine. So he is the expert in that sense and has brought hardware to market and wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't leading the creation of that thing. The other co-founder has a finance background, met in Columbia. So note the person sitting next to you could be your co-founder, co-conspirator, or somebody to collaborate or finance your next business down the road. But ultimately, with Luke having the finance background, knowing that that wasn't who I was, coming more from a tech product side, that between us having different skill sets and meeting in safe environments that were collaborative and not friends first, I think that's a huge point that Frank made. It enabled a mechanism, a foundation, and then each step of the way, a startup's like you're trying to create value out of something that has nothing, right? You're asking for favors, you're beg, borrowing, and stealing, all the cliches, but you really are trying to figure out how to extract the most value out of your extended network. And so as you're networking your way through those 20 to 30-minute conversations, you're finding a lawyer. And the other amazing thing, just to say it clearly, is that if you're doing anything like what we're both doing, that has a climate tech or impact focus in any regard, you're walking this fine line of public-private partnership in a way that's so powerful because people truly see the impact story and they want to contribute to a company that's going to help electrify and provide equity and create local jobs and do all the things. Because when you're looking at that versus some AR startup, like they'll get funded through a completely different animal, a completely different mechanism of how they go to market. But companies like us, we're able to walk that fine line and truly bring on people who are mission aligned, who are really there for the right reason.
I don't have too much to add. I mean, you hit on a lot of things there. I would say in general, there's 2 buckets of folks you hire at a startup when you're building a team. There are the people that will run through a brick wall. That bucket. They didn't go to law school. They didn't get an MBA. They didn't work at Samsung for 10 years. But man, they will run through a brick wall, and they're usually under 30. Those are great to have, and they're cheap. Fantastic. Then you have the expertise that you're looking to hire to fill gaps. So my first real hire, first salaried position, was the former deputy director at the state level of the DOT to bring on to lead policy and government affairs, right? She's still with me today, right? So first hire back in January 2019, still with me today, leading our corporate affairs function. So all government relations, comms, everything, right? That's just one example. That was specific expertise I needed. If I'm gonna go work with cities at the DOT level and the mayor's office level, I don't know really how to do this. I can generally control a room, I can come in and pitch the company, but I need the expertise on the politics and right? So you gotta hire for that. My CFO, he has literally 40 years experience at Microsoft and Amazon, has taken companies public. It took me 6 months of just constant begging to recruit him onto the team 2 years ago. I know nothing about finance. I mean, now I do, but I don't know anything about finance, right? It's kind of both. So I needed to plug that hole, I needed that gap. I need that gray hair on the team, right? So those are just 2 examples. So you hire the people that run through a brick wall, have a bias for action, they're cheap. I'm just being totally transparent with you all. And then you hire the specific skill sets that you need, and the combination of those 2 things, that's a startup.
You know, if I'd have known it was about the brick walls, I just know a lot of cheap people. What I now need to do is combine it with cheap and leaving the hole in the wall.
Well, if I didn't say anything else offensive, I'm just, yeah, okay.
Not at all. I'd love to share with you and pose to you some of the questions that we have received from the students in response to the readings that had been shared. Beatrice had asked, given the infrastructure challenges posed by urban density, such as limited space and high upfront costs, what policies and incentives could further accelerate the deployment of EV charging stations in cities?
I have one that I say all the time. We have the Inflation Reduction Act. We have the Federal Infrastructure Bill, massive $1 trillion piece of legislation. From my perspective, I would trade all that in for a 1-sentence policy at the federal level, which is When you get an upgrade on the grid, if it's public charging, you jump the queue. That's it. It could be like 2 sentences. That's all I need, right? Because the biggest barrier to everything that we're talking about is connecting to the grid and getting access to power. That is the biggest barrier. Permitting's annoying, zoning's annoying, it's a headache. All these other things are headaches, but access to power, 10x, number one problem in EV charging. Grids are maxed out in so many cities. There are entire neighborhoods in San Francisco and DC and New York. If I go to, whether it's ComEd in Chicago or Con Ed here or PG&E, and I say, I want 2 megawatts of power here, they're an investor-owned utility. They're required by law to get me that power. That is the law, but not on any timeline that makes sense. So they'll say, sure, I can get you power there, but 2038, we're upgrading that substation, it'll be 2038. Right? So I would just say, jump the queue. That would be the number one policy thing. That would be transformative. Because right now, the way big infrastructure is done in cities in the US is on 5 to 7 year timelines. Because if you're going to build a building like the SEPA building, right, you don't need to get their power there less than 5 years, because it takes 5 years to do anything on a building like this. So if you need a 2-3 megawatt upgrade on a building, 5 years is no problem. I want to get a deal done with a landlord tomorrow to bring power and open a station in 6 months. They're not made for that. They're not set up for that. But if I was able to jump the queue because it's public EV charging and Con Ed did our stuff first, oh my God, I don't need federal tax credits. I don't need, just do the upgrade. Right? So it kind of goes back to, like, it's one of the reasons why I love policy. There are sometimes just simple solutions out there. Politically and all these other things, that's another question. But there are simple solutions out there sometimes.
What opinions do you have on the grid? There are several questions that had been raised with regards to the grid's capacity and your view of where it is today versus where we would like ideally to be, which is not reliant on the current grid that we've got. How much are you stymied based upon that infrastructure, and do either one of you have views on the next step for that, or is that somebody else's problem to solve?
Well, I can hop in here and then maybe you have a perspective. One of the things, this goes back to the journey and research. When you start a company, research doesn't end. You're constantly learning, iterating, understanding how you're adapting your business for real life, right? So one of the things that my team is spending a lot of time on right now is, also when you run a company, you have to focus. So we're focused on fast charging, urban environments, 10 to 50 stall stations. That's what we're doing. Don't get distracted. What I'd really love to do, though, is add a 1, 2, 5 megawatt battery to every site that we're doing, right? To not just push energy into the grid, but also use that to regulate our electricity costs on the charging side of things. Because that goes back to grid stability, allows the utility to do grid deferment. Oh, we don't need to do that upgrade because Revel put a 5 megawatt battery there that stabilizes the grid in that neighborhood. There's a lot of things that need to go into that, though, from fire regulations to the business model of exporting energy into the grid and making sure it's very clear so that I can raise the money and there's a very clear way to make money, right? So there's a lot of things that need to happen. That's just one example of just like energy storage, pairing that with every fast charger out there. That just makes sense, but it's hard to do in practice.
Okay. Do you have any opinions on storage?
Yeah, I mean, totally agree with you. So ultimately, where we are is obviously just deploying New York, Michigan, Chicago, Massachusetts, Connecticut, California, and having a growing pipeline of just like taking what we've built and putting it on the existing infrastructure. But certainly when we talk about additional services, first is actually looking at connectivity. And we're working with the carriers, recognizing that this can also be a platform to provide that densification of network. Looking at 5G, the node small cell mesh network that's required in cities, that is another problem for the built environment, becomes an additional revenue stream for us and a partnership that is basically pulling us into different opportunities where, frankly, that could be bigger than the charging sector. But like, let's put that aside. Next is really looking at grid services. And that fits everything from storage to demand response to virtual power plants and all the things that come with it. In order for that to like happen effectively, though, you'd need scale in the built environment. So it doesn't, and there is that moment in innovation for charging and storage, if you want to call it that, which is not fully figured itself out the way that charging is understood. And the standards are pretty much set, even though they're still in flux with things like the NACS handle and all of that. But details are still being figured out, but it's pretty much like a paradigm that the industry is working within, where when you bring in some of these new components like V2X and storage, you're getting into a zone of that innovation curve where it's still more of an R&D, not true commercialization. So like we can run pilots and we can do all these different opportunities with the funding sources available with the utilities who want to experiment, but it still is in that sandbox environment before we can fully scale. But really, if you look at this at true scale, that is the opportunity.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to use the example of like Amazon starting with selling books before
Right.
becoming the everything store. Really, once you have that footprint in cities, that energy management is the much larger market opportunity.
One of the things that gets me so, and I'm just like giddy thinking about it, right? There's 1.5 million cars in the 5 boroughs in New York City, 1.5 million. Just back of the envelope kind of math, the amount of power that New York City as a city uses every day, that's about 100,000 EV batteries, 100 to 150,000, right, depending on the day. So about 10 to 15% of the vehicle fleet in New York, if they were all electric, stores the power a city needs in an entire day. Just think about that. So think of a world, we're here 20 years from now, where pretty much every vehicle is electric in New York City. And a lot of vehicles are plugged in. And what if when they're plugged in, they're also connected to the grid, and it's bidirectional? You almost don't even need a power plant, or you need very little power, because everything is just simultaneously moving electrons around. So when you think about a world of EVs like that, oh my God, it is exciting. You're almost like putting the power plants out of business, right? Because you need so much less. You don't have to meet these peak loads on the grid all the time. So they got me really excited. Okay, but I am a realist. I like reality, and when you go back to reality, you're like, okay, what's the business model? What's the utility commission doing about this? Are they even allowing vehicle to grid? Right, so there's so many questions. But when you just pick yourself up and just like think about where this world is going, man, it's exciting. Where essentially every vehicle out there is like its own little energy source. It's a battery on wheels.
What do you need in order for that to happen?
So I just mentioned a few. The business case.
Yeah.
So even if the technology was there, so that's another one, most vehicle-to-grid chargers, they're kind of level 2. So a fast charging operator like me, that doesn't really make sense. You're kind of trickle charging the grid, think of it like that. I need to fast charge the grid. So now you're talking about vehicle OEM battery technology as well needs to catch up to that. Utilities need to pay charging operators like us or the person that owns the car or the company that owns the car enough money to make it economically viable. So there's a lot there, right? The economics, the business case, the policy, the technology. But things move, everything moves faster than you think. So you fast forward 20 years, that is like such an exciting future. And a company like Revel going from 100 charging stalls today to 10,000 charging stalls in 20 years in the metro area. Are we a charging company or an energy company?
I was about to ask you that.
Yeah.
How do you define yourself? And are you willing to
I think
go?
about that energy future all the time, right? But it goes back to, as an entrepreneur, you just have to make progress. So yes, we're building towards that energy future. In the meantime, we need to make the economics work at charging today in order to raise the capital to build more chargers, in order to even allow a world like that, right? So that's kind of what's great about startups and entrepreneurship is you're constantly dreaming, and then you have to pull yourself back and realize, okay, but I got to meet payroll next week. I got to make the economics work. I got to raise more capital to build more chargers, which is exciting.
I'm thinking about what the next 20 years looks like, and it is exciting. I'd like to go back to another question that had been raised by Wilson, actually. How can city planners and policymakers accelerate the transition to renewable energy within dense, high-cost urban environments? And how can we ensure a more equitable access to those resources so that all communities are able to benefit from them? And I pose this to both of you.
I think like one thing that exists in the telecom industry that needs to exist in the charging industry, as well as other renewable energy distributed assets sectors like solar and storage, is the franchise agreement, which I've spoken to OTI, this office in New York City that's has these deals that the carriers all operate in. If you want to put some connectivity solution on a pole or anywhere in the city, there's a contractual framework that they all operate within. And when you're thinking about how to activate all the players in the charging ecosystem more effectively, you need to define a policy framework that an office like that will implement to enable an understood model, so then it can become more streamlined as a process to turn on chargers and work through things like the interconnection challenges that we have with the utilities. We basically have to move from pilot way of thinking to something that's more programmatic to get to a portfolio-driven strategy at true scale for all this to work, where I don't look, and Frank and I have talked about this a bunch, but nothing about this is competitive. It's all part of this cohesive ecosystem. And frankly, we're at such an early stage of this that really we need all of these players coming together and like breaking out of these silos with frameworks that enable us to all just get there faster.
I mean, just specifically to Revel, we're mostly building in low-income neighborhoods, actually, because that's where rideshare drivers live. So we're putting 80 stalls in our pipeline right now, sites at least. About to start paying rent on these sites. They're going to construction soon. Putting 80 stalls in the South Bronx. There's not one fast charger in the South Bronx today, right? So like that's just natural to our business because we're focusing on the rideshare sector. If you're going to focus on the rideshare sector, you have to put chargers where rideshare drivers live. So just kind of natural to our business and being an urban player, like this is exactly where we're building. If you kind of take a step back too, the last 10 years of EV adoption has been high net worth individuals, usually in a suburb. So where has charging been built? To date, the business model was road trips outside of cities, right? So most of the charging infrastructure today are along highways, again, built for high net worth individuals that live in suburbs that have garage or driveway access. They only need chargers when they go somewhere long distance. The next 10 years of EV adoption is cities. It's things like rideshare. So it's a very different demographic that you're going after for companies like us. So it's kind of exciting. We're kind of moving into this mass adoption area.
Both of you need partners. We've spoken about that. Can you speak more colorfully about the joys and the travails of public-private partnerships? You mentioned the networking, and Jeff's getting some flashbacks to his experiences here. But can you share some of your experience? What have you learned? How to embark upon them? How to make them successful? Are there different perspectives with regards to time and expectations, and how do you manage those? Public-private partnerships.
I can hop in here first. God, my mind went to a lot of different places. I would say every single thing we've launched, every market we've launched on mopeds, rideshare here in New York City, we ran into some 11th hour crazy thing on the political regulatory side. I'll give you one example. I remember it was a Friday night around 11 p.m. New York time. I was out with a couple of friends having a drink, and my phone rings. Wait a minute. That's the number of this certain commissioner in San Francisco, and we're launching mopeds Monday, by the way, and we have a signed agreement with the city, and everything's done. I get on the phone. Hey, you can't launch Monday. There's a certain someone who you did not meet with that's pissed off. You're going to have to meet with them. There's no launching on Monday. This is one very simple example. This is someone that my team emailed 3 times, and they denied the meeting. They didn't want to meet, right? So it's just an example of like every single market, there's an 11th hour, some political thing you weren't expecting, some regulatory thing, and you just got to kind of work your way through it. Every single market. I remember in New York City, when we launched rideshare in 2021, goes back to the mantra of don't launch without permission. One thing that's happened in the rideshare market in New York City is there's a very clear regulatory framework that Uber and Lyft operate under. The laws are very clear. You have to get this insurance, get this thing, 6 months of paperwork, and then you can operate rideshare in New York City. So we did all that. Went through all that, got all the proper things, got everything. Okay, boom, we got our certification. We're good to go. Okay, don't launch without permission. Let's make sure certain officials know that we're launching. And let's just say we ran into some political things when we had that phone call, which we did not need to have, but we wanted to have, and this is the prior administration, right? Not the current one. And we basically got like threatened on that call, do not launch. Even though everything from regulatory, like we are just, there's nothing, oh, we're also building public charging infrastructure, we're using all EVs, this is like everything you ever wanted, right? So it's just another example of just running to a regulatory political headwind that can come very unexpectedly. And we had to deal with that. We ended up having to win the PR battle And that's how we got through that one. Sorry if long-winded answer, but I tried to give two specific examples.
Not at all. Thank you, Jeff.
I would say that when you talk to individuals, they have good intentions and they believe, but when you talk to these agencies, ultimately they don't often talk to each other, and there's a lot that gets lost in translation. And so the path to procurement, frankly, from pilot to full scale, when you're looking at whether it be New York City, is probably one of the worst out of everyone we've dealt with. It's just the complexity of the different agencies that you navigate through, and different administrations that may have somebody in a role, and then that role shifts, or that person leaves, or that agenda dynamic. There's so many things you have to consider. And frankly, like where we did the pilot with the DOT initially, about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago that we started that one. And then ultimately, they have their targets for charging and curbside and being written into their reports into how the retrofit lamppost charger should be a part of the broader fabric. But then you're dealing with different people, you're then dealing with different dynamics, you're dealing with, should we do charging curbside at all in a city like New York? So honestly, like, but then you go to other markets which don't have that same level of stakeholder complexity. And it's not to say that there's not still a huge opportunity for what we're doing in New York City. It's just been one of the most challenging markets of a lot of promise, a lot of projects that start and then stop, or take to a certain point, or get stuck in pilot purgatory for what we're doing. Because frankly, there's a lot of, we have I go back to the example, like we have the technology we need. It's a challenge of leadership a lot of the time, of people having the openness to actually take the leap of faith that's needed in order to bring something new to market. And that's not in all cases, but in many cases, and the bigger the city, the more of that bureaucracy that you encounter. So,
well, let me give you some of the positives, though, right?
Yeah, I don't mean to be all negative.
There have been DOT commissioners in certain cities that have pounded the table for us on the politician side to say, we need more transportation options in this city. Let Revel launch. We have had that. Just incredible public servants that are just trying to bring more options to their city. We would have never launched in cities like DC and a few others without those people. So yes, you run into headwinds, but there are also amazing individuals out there that when you're transparent as a company, you communicate, you let them know what you're bringing to that city and how you're gonna operate, and then they go advocate for you. Those people are amazing.
100%.
Yeah.
Speaking of amazing people, I very much would like to ensure that our audience members, and especially our students in the course, are able to speak to you directly and ask the questions that they would like. So if I could you show your hands for the...
Hi, my name is Lena. I'm part of this practicum. I was wondering, so with the NEVI program, I think that it's pretty connected to the Justice 40 initiative under Joe Biden's executive order, which, you know, as we all know, is supposed to, the benefits of which are supposed to benefit marginalized people in this country. So when you're placing, where you're deciding to start these programs or the Voltpost, is that something that directly comes to mind, especially when it comes to funding, or how is that a part of the process one way or another?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that comes to the whole democratizing charging access mission, that really this isn't about just putting chargers in the gentrified neighborhoods or those who are wealthier who can potentially charge at home, but really unlocking the ability for everyone to go from gas to electric, and looking at those communities historically left behind and being able to provide charging in those communities at a fraction of the cost to actually make the unit economics work, so you can deploy level 2 both in parking lots and curbside. And so we've worked closely with the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, and ultimately this community-based charging portion, which is $2.5 billion, where they've been going through multiple waves of funding opportunities, and effectively there will be another announcement of winners in somewhere between now and the end of the year timeframe. And working with those public stakeholders who frankly don't have that experience, because everyone's unlocking budget for charging for the first time in history on the public side, and then people talk about thought leadership, but it's really just showing up and acting as true partners, whether it be parking lot scale or city scale deployment, of how they can think about how to provide that equitable access to charging and how we can be a partner, but really just be one of multiple partners in doing that analysis of rationalizing where the charger should go and where you should be doing things like what we offer, where you should be doing fast charging, and really thinking about a more holistic approach.
Tell you what's really frustrating? The way a lot of these federal grants and subsidies are done, whether it's NEVI, whether it's CFI, whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act and the 30% investment tax credit for things like fast charging, there's a lot of different programs out there. They use these census maps for low-income neighborhoods, and sometimes they can be a little bit all over the place. So like this little section, and this one isn't, and this one. So I literally have certain sites in my pipeline where I want to put a massive charging site here. If I go across the street, I get a 30% tax credit. Here I don't. I'm not building it there now. Actually, the community gets nothing. So I'm just giving you like the other side of the coin, because we can be so precise with these things sometimes, and it can be very frustrating for the private sector when it's like, it's just across the street. Like, just kind of, the economics work if I get the 30% tax credit, but they don't work on this side. And I literally have several sites like that, because the map is so crazy. It's not like, it's very piecemeal. So I would just give you like the frustration side of that. Yeah.
You had a question.
Yeah, just for Voltpost, when retrofitting these lampposts, do you have to change or add demands to these lampposts? Because, like, to charge, or to turn on a light is a lot, or whatever. Charge of cars, multiple kilowatts. So what is that? How intense is that? And then also, how do you, since the public thing that I've seen in like city bikes, there's been a decent amount of vandalism that goes on with that. How do you deal with various outside stakeholders that might vandalize or hinder the ability of these chargers to be at full capacity?
Good question. So you are correct that typical lamppost is 110, and then we're upgrading to 240. And the way you do that is because when they did the upgrade to LED, which is like another unlock in when you think about like why this makes sense to do now, there in the conduit underground is room to pull a cable bundle to provide that power to the pole, which doesn't impact the power going to the light. It's a new service with a utility certified meter integrated, connected through the cloud to provide an end-to-end solution like hardware and software that we could just place this down and have everything we need. So we have Exelon, the largest utility in the US, as an investor, RWE, the largest utility in Germany, their New York team also as a major investor, and the utilities see that this process that they typically have done for fiber upgrades or other interconnection of just doing that cable pull could actually make sense, and just doing something that may be obvious in parallel sectors and now applying it to EV charging to avoid the construction and trenching, which saves tens of thousands of dollars and a tremendous amount of permitting and time constraints, now unlocks the ability to truly provide unit economics as well as scale to deploy that traditional chargers just cannot do. The other component is when you're looking at when the power is coming from above and just being able to drop the power down, which again provides that power for the interconnection. When you talk about vandalism, that's part of why we did this from a modular structure approach, and by having so there's 4 modules on one lamppost, which provides the flexibility of 2 or up to 4 level 2 chargers, depending on curbside or parking lots, to meet the use case and the parking regulation, frankly, as well. And so when you think about it from that perspective, when we're monitoring the charger health through the cloud, by being able to have a module just unplugged and then in service remotely, and then just plugging a new one in, we can truly get to that maximum reliability, as well as we build servicing into the contracts up front. So it's not just selling a charger and being done with it, but really thinking about that recurring revenue for us and the project health, as well as the reliability that you need for public chargers.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you for being here and for the very important work that you're both doing in the private sector. I know there are a lot of people interested in policy making here. So what are certain steps that local government can take to make things easier for companies like yours that are climate technologies transforming the space? Thank you.
I mean, I have one very tangible example that we've made some improvements recently that has paid a lot of dividends. I consider utilities government. Yes, a lot of them are investor-owned, but they're quasi-government, just the way they're run and the politics behind the scenes. So one of the things that we've done with Con Ed recently is say, listen, we're building 3 sites in New York right now that are 48 stalls or more. We have a whole bunch of other sites that are 15 to 30 stalls. They've never built charging infrastructure like this because it doesn't exist. So they're learning. We're learning. This doesn't work if we send each other emails. So every single project now that is a signed lease, that is all set and basically moving to permitting, their side of the table and our side of the table, my infrastructure team, construction design team, they have a weekly meeting about every single project. So whatever project managers on the Con Ed side, they're meeting every single week, action items, driving that meeting. This is just an example of like, nothing will get done if they're not helping, and not just helping, but rolling up their sleeves and doing this with us. Because it goes back to that access to power in the grid, and so much work has to happen on their side to bring that power to our property line for then us to do our work. And if they're not working with us, this is not happening. So that's just been like a tangible thing, and it hasn't happened overnight. It's taken a good 4 or 5 years to get here. And that's just relationship building, realizing we're a serious player. We're not just talking about charging, we're building them right now. So it doesn't happen overnight, but you get to a place now where, okay, we are a true partner now. There's no piece of paper that says it, but clearly it's happening. Because they got to meet their goals. We want to help the city meet its goals. Let's go. So it's been really good. Now we're trying to do the same exact thing with PG&E in the Bay Area. We have our first site going live in Q1. It'll probably be another year or two before we're at the same level as Con Ed, because it just takes time.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing the exact same thing, which is actually not even realizing that pattern, but having that relationship with the utility, it is a true partnership, even if it's not on paper, with those weekly calls and them helping you navigate through the machine of their complexity and how they see the world and the things that are going to be blockers and like things you just, frankly, as a company that's scaling quickly, you're needing to rely on them for areas of focus. And then when you talk about the municipalities as well, like it's finding those people who are truly waving the flag, who are willing to carry the ball forward in a certain respect within their jurisdiction. And then that becomes the dot connector to unlock companies like us or Revel or others who are truly trying to be good partners to meet those goals on the public side and not just, I mean, it really is like building purpose alongside profit, truly, where it's not like one or the other or one after the other, but it's like interconnected at its core. And when you are truly operating from that premise, I don't know, but the public agencies, the stakeholders, they really do see you're coming from the right place. Obviously, you still have to build a business and make money, but in the end of the day, like it definitely has a different setup than those who are just kind of aggressively coming in with their view of the world, trying to just slam their technology into the built environment and just take whatever damage, collateral damage as it comes. And I think like it goes back to your point, Frank, as well, like asking for permission, working through what that takes versus other companies in the past who have obviously just not taken that approach,
Yeah.
to say the least.
Thank you. You have a question? Yeah, go you.
So I look at the electrification challenge generally as a behavioral challenge and technological challenge, right? So are you guys looking at how do you probably gamify the way your projects are working, particularly in cities, by adding tiered rewards to consumers? Because at the end of the day, it's a consumer problem as well. Consumers need to adopt electrified vehicles or go for options that are a lot more sustainable in nature. But at the same time, looking at China and the advances that they're making in the space, the technology is advancing way too fast. So how do you also create products, whether it be Voltpost or Revel, in terms of your units, where you can actually look at future technologies being embedded internally into the systems that you're building?
I mean, I could take a first crack at this. I mean, one of the things that we have at our charging stations is making sure you actually don't need to download an app to use our charging stations. Think of the gas station experience. You pull up, take out a credit card, tap it, maybe your zip code, and that's it. It's not bad. We don't need to improve on it that much, right? Because I think a lot of charging companies tend to want you to download this, and it's just like, just let them tap their credit card. We can do the back-end data science to basically understand who that person is. So we can feed them rewards. We can text them, right? Once we maybe get their phone number, right? So anyway, all I'm trying to say is like trying to just keep things as easy as possible and make sure that it is just as simple to charge at Revel stations as it can be. In terms of like just pure tech, there are fast charging stations now that aren't considered fast anymore. So like 50 kW, 75 kW, that's fast, but it's not super fast. It's not charging a car in 15 minutes, it's charging a car in 45 minutes. So every charger we're putting in the ground moving forward now is 320 kW speed. Most cars, except for like the Porsche, and that's really it, honestly, because even the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6 can't accept those charge speeds. So we're kind of trying to future-proof sites by putting in the fastest charging technology so that 5 years today, we're not totally like not in the ballgame. So those are the two things tangibly that we're trying to do. Yeah.
I mean, I agree. It's just all about reducing friction to the end user and really looking at an ecosystem approach when you're looking at partnership, in that you got to focus on what you're building and then recognize if you lean into partnership, you can actually create extra, that 1 + 1 = 3. And in the end of the day, a lot of these frameworks are already in existence. So it's where can you tap in to create that lift for what you're building without having to recreate the wheel.
Thank you. Yes.
How do you guys change your value messaging based off the stakeholder? So like, let's say you were to speak to a political figure or someone that you needed their support, but they didn't care too much about electric vehicles. And then specifically for Voltpost, how have the electric vehicle manufacturers responded to your product? Have they been supportive of it?
So to answer to your second part, yeah, we're in talks with all of the automakers. They, in order to sell more EVs, need convenient and affordable charging access. That obviously includes highway fast charging corridors, it includes the depots like Frank's building, and then it also requires the public level 2 charging access that doesn't require these massive grid upgrades that can fit in the fabric of communities. And it also requires charging at dealerships. Both, one, so enough kilowatts are in the vehicle to leave the lot as mandated by law, like there needs to be X percentage of gas in the vehicle to sell, but also as a brand piece where ultimately the corporate and the dealership side have their own set of pain points in electrification. So if we can help solve for the automakers the dealership charging experience, then that creates another point of leverage, which frankly they pull us into different markets.
Normally in meetings like that, if for whatever reason they don't like EVs, they don't care about EVs, you just shift the economic angle, because normally they're one side or the other. So then you say, okay, you don't care about EVs, you're a particular politician in New York, but you do care about us spending $100 million over the next 2 years in charging sites in New York that go straight into unions, go straight into different workforces, construction workers, that you do care about. So why would you not back this, right? You don't want investment in your neighborhood, right? You don't want investment in your district. So if they don't care about EVs, just go the economic route. That's usually, if they don't like either of those, I don't know, you got a strange one.
Yes. Question at the back.
My question for you is, how do you plan to recycle your EV chargers, and how do you plan to not impact the environment while doing so? And additionally, I wanted to know what are the opportunities for someone who is interested in recycling, and how can they get an opportunity out of recycling your EV chargers?
Yeah, so our oldest chargers today are about 3 years old in the field. I'm planning on keeping them at least 10 years with just constant weekly maintenance and parts repair. If you have any thoughts on how to recycle at the end of 10 years, I am all ears, haven't even thought about it. But yeah, any suggestions, send my way.
I mean, with what we built, actually, the modular platform-based approach actually creates circularity in the way we design and build and actually deploy these units. in that when a unit goes down, a module comes down, it can be serviced, we can reuse a lot of the components, we can ultimately recycle. I mean, like coming from a Samsung universe, like that the first market is not the only market for some piece of technology. It ultimately can be brought to secondary markets. And as we develop new modules to future-proof and think about faster charging, energy management, they can be tacked on to that same charger that at one point only provided 2 level 2 chargers. Well, now we can turn on, as both the pricing strategy and the technology evolution, different services. And then as we have different use cases that make sense for different environments of downtown Brooklyn versus densely populated Upper West Side or what have you, you start to think through which services are that right fit. And as you look at the data, you can actually start to decipher, was that actually true? Or maybe should we switch something out? And so it becomes part of a larger fabric in conversation.
Tesla, for example, they take the batteries back from their customers and recycle it themselves. So any idea on if you guys plan to do that, or do you want customers to recycle the chargers themselves by giving them to a secondary recycler? Because
I mean, we design, build, own, and operate our chargers, so we would be taking anything back and basically decommissioning, taking the original parts of whatever is reusable to recycle ourselves.
Sorry. We have a question from another one of our students, DeAndre. Oh, no, here. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry to point.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you both. But what strategies did you guys use to pretty much build your capacity to deal with those 11th hour political or 11th hour wrenches that was thrown in your guys' projects? Was it something that was financial? Did you guys build a capacity around, bringing people on that knew how to deal with those issues? But what did that kind of look like after you dealt with that?
So I will use the San Francisco example, right? So before I get to that, I would just say in general, whenever you hear bad news, just stay calm. Just take it in. Which kind of sucks actually, because when I hear good news, I'm also kind of calm. So it's kind of like a weird personality trait I've taken on now, where I'm just kind of like, I don't know what that says, so just putting that out there. The San Francisco example around a 12th hour, 11th hour phone call, I immediately realized, okay, this is just an ego thing. So one thing you realize when you start talking to more and more politicians at any level, they have high ego. So whatever reason this person's ego was bruised, no problem. Give me his phone number, I'll call him immediately, which they did. I called him up. We had a chat. I said, listen, I am so sorry. I will fly out first thing tomorrow morning and let's have breakfast. I want to make sure that you know exactly who we are and what we're going to do for this city, because we're not doing anything without your support, which I knew was bullshit. I'm launching no matter what. But the point is you're just kind of like bringing yourself, which is exactly where that person wanted. They wanted you at their feet, and you just got to put yourself there. So just get run over, and then they were fine with it. So I kissed the ring, kissed the toes, and we launched, right? So it's just a lesson there of just like when you deal with politicians, you have to realize there are high egos everywhere, and put your ego in the basement, because all that matters is the company.
I was wondering the whole time about microgrids. It seems, to borrow a term from chemistry, that your limiting reagent or your big bottleneck is just grid infrastructure, be it political, be it physical. So in either your early phases of imagining the future of energy and imagining how you would scale in New York and in other markets, how has your thinking evolved with sort of the rise of microgrids? And the second part of the question is actually from a student who had to leave, so I'm going to try to not mince his words. But he was asking about essentially a similar question. If you are depending on the speed of the grid for fast charging, what is stopping you from doing a lot more with stationary charging on site?
So stationary charging on site, meaning you're bringing an energy source to that site that's not the grid?
Correct. Battery storage.
Yeah. I would say, okay, so take microgrids first. So microgrids is a term that people like to talk about where energy can be generated on site. You could have EV charging. You could push energy back into the grid. Maybe you have solar on site. It can mean a lot of different things. Every single thing I just said, solar on site, a canopy, a battery, vehicle to grid, guys, all of that costs money. All of that costs money. And when you're raising capital to build sites with, you have to make sure the spreadsheet makes sense and the assumptions you have make money and make money quickly. And the second you add a solar canopy, you just added $500,000 of cost to the site in New York. Okay. Second you add a battery, wait, what are the economics of the battery? How are you going to use that battery? Is it just for shaving peak demand? Are you going to push the energy into the grid? Will Con Ed allow that? What is the tariff they're going to pay you? How does it change between winter and summer? Man, it gets complicated very quickly. So in business and startups specifically, you have to focus. Because focus equals speed, and it's your only competitive advantage. Because big companies have plenty of capital. Your only advantage is speed. So for us, it's build chargers. Have the densest, most reliable, best charging experience in the cities we tackle. And we'll slowly add in other things as we get comfortable. So that's our strategy. I would also recommend that, whatever you're thinking in your idea. When you say something like microgrids, it sounds great. It's a lot of cost. It's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of things aren't quite figured out yet, which means speed is low, which means it's not getting done. So that's how I think.
Exactly. Like, just do that. Retrofit lampposts into chargers. Show them how you make money on that.
Yeah.
Add stuff over time that become incremental revenue streams. Don't try to boil the ocean on day one. And microgrids, like that innovation curve, like a lot is still to be figured out, and each one of the components is a business in and of itself.
I'm conscious of the fact that I want everybody to have the opportunity to network. You have a question. So a couple more questions and then crudité.
Thank you so much for sharing your candid thought process and how you're building your company. On the similar line, I'm very curious to know, at the end of the day, how do you define your success, both in quantitative terms and qualitative? Quantitative being the funds raised, the money you've generated, or qualitative, the quality of life you're giving, or environmental challenge that you have. So what's that one thing that makes you sleep at night?
I mean, for me, I come back to the same reason why I started this, which is in 20 years, or however many years into the future, did we win the race to net zero? And did the work that we're doing today make a measurable impact toward that goal? And it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's going to be many companies that are swinging for the fences, like Frank and us, across the entire spectrum. But did we stand up in that limited window? Did we do our best shot and ultimately make a real impact? And if you do that, then I believe you can also build a profitable business along the way.
It's funny that when you asked that question, the first thing I thought of is, does my team enjoy working with me? When I go home, does my wife like to be with me? I'm about to have a kid in 2 weeks. Are they going to like me, right? So I immediately went personal. So it's just funny how that works. On the professional side, I think in the intro they mentioned 100 and something million from BlackRock. Yes, we've raised 100 something million from BlackRock. It's meaningless unless we build a sustainable business that makes money, and I don't need to raise more money. So when I think about success, it's, you see these numbers from startups about what they raised, it is all meaningless unless you have a business that makes money, has a path to making money that is clear and is sustainable. So we're trying to get there, and it's hard.
Yes, you have a question?
Thanks. So I'm really interested in the union aspect. This kind of goes to both of you. In terms of, you have the EVITP, Electric Vehicle Installation Training Program. And so I'm curious the degree in which you're able to work with IBEW and other unions to roll out these companies or, your ideas, and to what degree they actually serve as obstacles and how you could kind of move through that.
I can take a shot at this. I can tell you right now from conversations happening, the 30% investment tax credit as part of the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, requires union labor. So every project we're doing right now, we're bidding out what is the union labor cost. Does it make sense? Is it economical? Is it viable? I'd love to get that 30C tax credit if we can get it. So the answer to your question is, yeah, every project we're engaged with union labor, we're talking to them. At the same time, it comes down to the site must make money. I can't emphasize this enough. Anyone that's been following macroeconomic trends, why do you think no company has IPO'd in 2 years, right? The bar for raising money, the bar for any company has been raised. So it is front and center. This is not 2021 anymore, where everybody was raising hundreds of millions of dollars. It didn't matter what your burn was. It's a complete opposite now. So I would say engage completely. I want that 30C tax credit. I also can't do stupid things, right? So that's kind of, that's the constant negotiation.
And for us, I mean, leaning into the unions and leaning into the tax credits, but also recognizing, because we're not as beholden from like the real estate play of having to pick our sites because of the unit economics, that they truly become partners that pull us into projects. So these install and O&M companies, boots on the ground, are actually sales channel partners. The same way they'll pick up a piece of technology and sell that solar panel because they believe in that solar panel being better than the other. In our case, they can actually understand Voltpost, understand the value prop, and we're developing the Voltpost developer program and looking at ways that we can actually not just have them make money upfront as a one-off fee, but potentially introduce the concept of recurring revenue where they win with the reliability of their charger.
You know, when we talk about startups, it's as it is very difficult to raise financial capital, right, at different stages of the, growth stage. So what challenges did you face when you were raising money in the market? And how do you deal with that challenges?
I just describe it like you're going to get the 1,000 no's before you get the 10 yeses that change your life and change the spectrum of what the company is. And you have to have that persistence and grit and determination and vision and passion and wake up every day and get punched in the face and fall down and get back up. And failure is learning. It's all part of the process. And if you can continue to persevere in spite of getting smacked in the face and getting that no because somebody would rather think about what they're going to eat for lunch than invest in your company, like people don't care. But at the end of the day, if you care and you find other people believe in what you believe, you can actually make a real impact.
I'll try and give you like 2 tangible pieces of advice. And this is more early stage, right? Because growth stage is different. Growth stage is show me the numbers. Right? You want to raise at a $700 million valuation? Where's the profit? Show me the numbers. So growth stage is different. Let's talk early stage when you have an idea, you're a PowerPoint, maybe you have some sort of product out there that you've developed, you have some functioning app or something that you're doing, right? So that stage. 2 pieces of advice I'd give you is a founder recently came to me asking for some advice. And I said, who have you spoken to? So I've talked to everybody. I said, who? He said, I think I've talked to like 5 or 6 investors. Are you kidding me? That should be every day or 2, 5 or 6 investors. So I cannot emphasize enough, if you go into this journey, expect to talk to 150 different investors before you raise money. And if you don't want to do that, do not do it, right? 5 or 6 is squat. That's a day or 2, okay? So that's just like my first piece of advice, just like mentally get yourself there. You have to kiss a lot of frogs. Second piece, have some framework around the frogs you kiss, meaning every VC is different, every source of capital is different. So one of the frustrations I had was every call I got on, I was educating folks for the first 15 minutes, this is when we were a moped business, what an electric moped was, and the difference between that and an e-bike. So clearly, if you spend your first 20 minutes just educating them on that particular market, you're probably gonna get a no pretty quickly, because they don't even understand what the hell you're doing. So you have to find the investors that invest in your sector, in something that you're doing, what is your strategy, and go find that person. I remember the unlock for me was I was so frustrated one day I came home and I said, okay, I'm done talking to anybody that doesn't invest in mobility. And I just Googled top seed mobility funds, and like some random friggin' list showed up on Google, and it was like 10 of them. And I was like, okay, I've spoken to 2 out of 10, those 10, I gotta get in front of the other 8. And I found a way to do that, and it led to my seed round. Because they knew what we were doing, we had a seed check done in like a week. Because I didn't have to educate them. Because a lot of investors, this is something other people don't tell you, kind of like the beginning of every year, they do their offsite, they do their onsite, the investors, the partners of that firm come together and they talk. They kind of pick 3, 4, 5 things they want to invest in that year. And then they go look for it. So a lot of times it's just like, you did enough matchmaking in the sector that you're in, and then generally they were looking for whatever the hell it is that you're doing because they see that trend just like you did, boom, and then the check happens. So those are my 2 pieces of advice. Yeah.
That's amazing advice. Thank you both. I would like to just extend my gratitude